Awesome, awesome. So it is 1 o'clock. I will have our first presenters from Southeast Missouri State University share their screen and start their presentation. Again, our presentation or our session is sponsored by Quickly, and I will put their link in the chat. So presenters, go right ahead. I will start your 15 minutes.
Okay, I have shared my screen. Is everybody able to see it?
Yep. Yes,
Looks
indeed.
good. All right.
Yes.
Let's go for it. Well, thank you guys. My name is Abby Risser. I am the online instructional coordinator at Southeast Online. We are going to be talking about our HyFlex programming here in August. We are going to be officially launching our very first HyFlex program. Our director for that program is here with us today. So we will go ahead and get started and just jump right into it. So as we were prepping for this presentation, we talked a lot about how navigating through the pandemic, COVID-19 caused a lot of what we call panic goji. As we had a major shift to online learning, there were a lot of challenges. There was a lot of panic, but now that we're settling into something of a new normal, we are really provided with a lot of opportunities for some really cool technological innovations and some pedagogical innovations that we are exploring. And for us at Southeast Missouri State, what that looks like partially is a big expansion of HyFlex. So we are delivering HyFlex programming to a very diverse and unique student population. So that's part of what we're going to talk about today too, is the way that these unique populations are really thriving in these HyFlex environments. Before we get too into it, just because I know that HyFlex really does kind of look different depending upon what institution you're in, I did want to point out that for us, it is all three options. So we do have an in-person traditional class setting. We have a synchronous Zoom version where people can interact in real time. And then we do have an online asynchronous version where students engage in their own pace and use email, and we use Canvas as our online learning management system that we run our HyFlex courses through. So without further ado, we have Dr. Clubbs and Dr. Dietrich here with us. Dr. Clubbs, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit about your program.
Sure. So I am the program coordinator for our Master of Arts in Higher Education Administration at Southeast. This is for students who want to work as student affairs professionals. I came to this position 2 years ago. Prior to that, I taught communication studies at Southeast. And so when I moved into my position, originally the job description was for someone to take the program to be 100% online. But I looked at who our students were, and we had quite a few international students who were living in Cape Girardeau, which means for their visas, they would need to take some face-to-face classes. I also had a lot of current staff that were working already at Southeast. And so I had used HyFlex in the undergraduate program for comm studies, and I thought it could work as a program rather than just as having some classes HyFlex. If instead of making the program 100% online, we made it 100% HyFlex, so students could complete it in any of those three modalities that Abby mentioned.
Yeah, and then Dr. Dietrich is one of our TESOL professors in the English department. Dr. Dietrich, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about your program.
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm Sarah Dietrich, and as Abby mentioned, we actually have co-coordinators for our Masters in TESOL. We have about 70 students in the program each semester, and the students are all over the world. So when I started, there was the option to complete the Masters either as an online or in-person option, and with the pedagogy that Abby mentioned, we started turning those face-to-face classes into HyFlex courses, and we haven't gone back. So all of our courses are either 100% asynchronous or HyFlex, which gives students, again, all over the world in different settings and different time zones, the opportunity to participate in any of those courses. And the students that we have, many of them are full-time students. The full-time students are often international students like the students that Brooke was mentioning who are in Cape Girardeau and come to the in-person classes. We also have a large number of students who are currently teaching, and so they complete the program as part-time students and usually take 2 courses each semester. Brooke?
All right. So I already mentioned some of these things about, how my job description was originally to take the program online. In the Panagogy that Sarah and Abby have mentioned, when I was teaching comm studies, I noticed that my underclassmen who were taking the public speaking class didn't always choose to make the best choices when it came to having a HyFlex situation, choosing how to attend. However, my upperclassmen did. And when I say whether or not they're making the best choices, I actually asked them at the end of the semester because I had noticed the grades were not as good as they had been in previous semesters for my SC 105 students. And they said, yeah, sometimes I'd turn on the Zoom and then I'd go do something else and I really wouldn't watch class. And then I wouldn't go back and watch the video. Like they acknowledged they didn't have that prefrontal cortex fully developed. They weren't necessarily making the right choices. But my upperclassmen loved the flexibility that it offered them. And so with this, I do have some students who complete the program 100% asynchronously now. They're going to take all of their classes online. But then people who prefer face-to-face, my international students who need to take their classes face-to-face, have that option. And then I also have a lot of students who really truly make the best use of that HyFlex modality where when they're in town and they have a babysitter, they're face-to-face. If they're traveling for work or they need to stay home with the sick kid, they might tune in on Zoom or they might do it asynchronously. It changes up every week.
And our program is a little bit different, and this is one of the things that we wanted to highlight, that most of the students in the TESOL program pick the modality that they're going to use and they stick with it. Every once in a while, there'll be somebody who's in an in-person class who isn't feeling well, and so they'll join via HyFlex. But usually, there'll be a cohort of people who are in the class. For almost every HyFlex class, I have 2 or 3 people who will join consistently via Zoom. And then again, as I mentioned, the rest of the students will join or participate in the class asynchronously.
So what HyFlex looks like for us in the Higher Education Administration program, I'm the only full-time faculty member in the program, and the adjuncts that we utilize are student affairs professionals at the university, like our VP of Enrollment Management teaches the enrollment management class. So what I'm describing is what I do and what I have kind of used as a model for them, and they use some of it and other things they don't. I use Nearpod because I feel like that provides the greatest fidelity for my students who are completely asynchronous, who are on Zoom and who are in class, because I can use the Nearpod slides that have an interactive element in class, and then I can also post it on our Canvas page, and the asynchronous students have a way to go through those slides and also participate in the polls and the short answers and those types of things. Each Zoom that we have for class is recorded, and I post that video with the captions. And so my students can utilize our learning management system to access those materials. That's also where they turn in assignments. And the trickiest thing has probably been with the presentations, because I feel like presenting is such an important skill to have. And so we've utilized Flipgrid and recording their presentations and putting the file in the cloud so that they share a link has been the best way for my asynchronous students to present. And then we watch their presentation during class time.
And if you watch the video that we did, you'll hear me saying that I've learned a lot from Brooke about different kinds of technology to include in classes. The way I've been preparing my HyFlex courses is basically treating them as if they were 100% online courses. So I have a PowerPoint presentation with a voiceover for every class. And it's been interesting to see that some of the students who attend the in-person class will also listen to that presentation, sometimes before, which gives them a little bit of sort of pre-discussion, and then sometimes after, they can go back and double check if there are concepts they weren't sure about. As Brooke said, we use Canvas for readings and materials. And something that I've been doing for presentations is I found that there are many formats and many conferences like the one we are at right now, where people need to know how to do some kind of a recorded presentation. And so that's what I actually ask the students to do at the end of each course, where they have a project, so that they learn to do exactly what we're doing right now. Everybody posts something like this, and then everybody views it and they all respond to each other asynchronously.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges of this. When I chose to take the program HyFlex, I made sure I spoke with all of the different stakeholders that we had with the program. So all of the folks who had taught for the program, current students, previous students, administrators, because I recognized taking the program HyFlex does make some extra work, especially for our folks that already have a full-time student affairs job and are teaching this class as an add-on. We also in our program have some options for students where they can take sports management classes for their electives, and those are taught by a different department. And so I talked with the full-time faculty there about how we might do this. So when I was getting everything all put together, everybody was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And then when the rubber really hit the road, folks were like, when do I have to switch to HyFlex? How long can I keep teaching the way I have been teaching? And so we had a little difficulty there, but most of our difficulty came with just the fact that this is new. The university wasn't sure how to charge for a HyFlex program. The university wasn't sure how to code classes that were HyFlex, particularly if the classes didn't meet for 3 hours at a time, if we were kind of using a blended format, even though we were HyFlex. And so we would feel like, okay, everybody's on board, and then we'd hit a wall with, someone saying like, well, we can't code a class that way. Well, you can't take that public yet that it's a HyFlex program because we don't know how to charge for it. And then of course, there's the challenge that I mentioned right at the beginning, which is that, I found my younger students had difficulty using a modality like this where they had that choice, and my older students did better. Graduate students, are making the most of it, particularly my non-traditional students, but I do have quite a few student athletes in the program. And I have found that population particularly thinks, oh, I'm tired after practice, I'll watch the videos later, and then they don't. And so they are not necessarily choosing the best modality for their learning style. There's also, of course, more potential to feel like, well, if the teacher doesn't really know me, maybe I can get away with some things. So there's some moral risk involved as well.
Great. So as Brooke mentioned, we're talking about some of the challenges. I expect that most of you teach HyFlex courses, and you know that they are a lot of work. And they are a lot of work before you teach. One of the things that I found particularly challenging is most of my courses are, we do a lot of small group and pair work, and that is just logistically complicated. Something I'm very, very interested in is how to build community within a HyFlex course. And that's difficult to do when you have, all of our microphones are in the ceiling. So we're all sort of shouting at the ceiling and there's voices coming down. So we've all had to learn how to do that. I would say that every class I'm sort of improvising a little bit more, but I work really hard to build that sense of community across different modes, and I'm constantly challenging myself. And what is great for me is I teach students or teachers, so I get to say, whoops, that didn't work, let's try something new. So
Now, I know we are running low on time, and we want to make sure we have enough time for our questions. So I wondered if Abby might go to this library. We have some pictures of our students. So to real briefly talk about student success, I have had non-traditional students who have said they wouldn't have been able to complete the program if it wasn't offered in this format. And so I just have two picture examples there. Over on the left, you'll see our university president standing in the middle. He came for our final in the fall. And so I had some students you can see on the screen, and then some students who normally were asynchronous maybe or on Zoom who chose to attend because the president was coming for a Q&A. And then I'm with one of our graduates who moved to St. Louis halfway through the program and was still able to complete the program because Wendell could do it online. So I'm having a lot of success with folks who might not have been able to complete a graduate degree if it were not for the HyFlex option.
And on the right-hand side, you have some photos from my classes. So I mentioned that we do a lot of pair work. So you can see the person who's sort of facing the wall there in the back. She's talking to someone who's joining the class via Zoom. At the bottom screen, you'll see that this was during times when people were wearing masks, and the student in the upper left-hand corner was actually in Saudi Arabia, and she would join our class for every class via Zoom. And then in the middle, you'll see the woman in the white shirt. She's originally from Ukraine, and this is her defending her thesis. And you can see that there are members of her class who were there in person, others who joined her defense via Zoom, and also one of her advisors, or actually I think it was two of her advisors from Ukraine were also able to join us via Zoom. So this is really a HyFlex version of her thesis defense.
Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. So great. Awesome. Awesome. It's so nice to see what others are doing always. So you've got a lot of questions in chat. So we have 5 minutes for questions. I am going to go back. Eduardo asks, what does your institute charge? Do they charge HyFlex students differently based on whether they choose to be in-person, virtual, or async, or is there a flat rate?
That is something that has recently changed. And so now our students who are HyFlex pay the same as our on-campus students. So that is something, and someone saying that they're wondering about the in-state versus out-of-state. That is something that our financial aid has also been working out so that out-of-state students get the online student rate so that they don't have to pay in-state or out-of-state.
Thank you.
Those are the kinds of things, though, I think it is important to recognize are not necessarily taken into consideration. And they are missed. So.
Thank you. There's also a question about how did you increase student accountability for their own learning?
That is also something that I would not recommend a HyFlex program for undergraduates. That's kind of a real broad kind of statement, but I feel like our students don't always know the best way to choose their modality. And I feel like the more mature they are and the more responsibility they have gotten used to taking, they're better able to make those choices. But now, you know, a lot of times at like a community college, you may have some non-traditional students who have already learned how to manage their time. And so I guess I don't want to make a blanket statement, but at Southeast, our undergraduate students who for the most part are traditional students, we're having trouble making some of those choices for themselves.
And I guess for me, most of the students that I work with are graduate students, but I do talk to them about the fact that, you know, if you're going to do this, do it well. Basically, get an A or get an F is kind of the way I put it. But I do have weekly, in each class, there are activities, I call them apply what you know activities, where students need to post each week where they are making connections between the readings and other things that they're doing. It doesn't mean necessarily they're doing the readings, but I do talk to them about what they're missing out on if they don't. So.
Thank you so much. And I think we have time for one more question in chat. When you refer to face-to-face, is this the in-person or a HyFlex with a choice between turning up into a classroom or logging in from a remote location?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how we were using it. I think for both of us, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brooke, there is always the option. I guess it would be better to say synchronous versus asynchronous. So for every synchronous session, students have the option to be physically in the same classroom or to join via Zoom. And then, at least in my classes, all of the students do asynchronous activities also. That's where there are a whole community that everybody does the same asynchronous activities.
Yes, and so this means that sometimes faculty walk by my classroom and I'm talking to one student who's sitting in a desk and 3 students who are on Zoom, and I'm recording it, you know, for the other 5 students who are going to be online. But I also have some components built in so that the students are interacting online kind of like they would in a blended class as well. But yeah, we have a physical classroom that's reserved for our HyFlex classes.
Thank you all so much. Bravo. So there are other questions for you all in chat if you want to respond to them. We'll also have time at the end of this session for Q&A, but thank you so much for that amazing presentation. And Dan, it is your turn. So if you have co-host, you let me know. I think you do, and you should be able to share your presentation.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, great. And you'll have 15 minutes and 5 minutes for questions.
All right, can you all see here?
Good afternoon.
Oh, hold on. See, hold on.
I'll just say quickly while Dan's getting started, please get in touch with any of us if you do have questions or would like to talk more. I hope you got the sense we like to collaborate. So.
All right, Gina, I was having trouble there. The only version I have is a recorded version, and it's. Could you hear it going when I open it up beforehand or not?
Yes. If you want to just share your screen and put on the recorded version and keep your audio, you should be fine. You just have to keep your mic open.
Do you all see it? All right. Okay, well, I'm going to click through in the non-presentation mode. Otherwise, it's going to start talking in my recording track, and then you're going to hear me in stereo, which may not be everyone's cup of tea. But I am Dan Sturdivant. I'm the head of school at Optima Academy Online. We are the world's first and only VR-based school of record. And what that means is that we use virtual reality for our primary mode of instruction. We are grades K through 9. We're a public charter school in the state of Florida. We also have partners in about 36 independent schools, mainly in the US, but some around the world, and offer some other activities like field trips and excursions with school districts and other organizations. But what I want to talk about today is how to integrate VR into a HyFlex curriculum. So one of the things that was evident in some of the questions that I've seen in sessions today is engagement. How do you drive engagement in HyFlex? How do you make sure that you're keeping students engaged, keeping screens on, for lack of a better way to say it? And so that's what I'm going to focus on. But first, a little bit about why I do what I do, and you can decide for yourself whether it's worth listening to. I grew up on a boarding school campus, and so it was an international boarding school based in the US, but we had about 26 different countries represented in the student body. I was there from the time I was born until I went to college. And so everything was experiential education, whether it was weekend activities, whether it was courses that had field trip components as part of them, you know, around the country, around the world, or dinner in the cafeteria where you may have 2 or 3 languages represented at the table. So I was naturally drawn to remote education and its ability to connect learners from all over the country or all over the state or all over the world. And it feels like a natural way for me to have a chance to make those connections for my students now moving forward. So OAO, Optum Academy Online, was born in 2022. It was a bit of a response to the pandemic. My colleague Adam Mangana began piloting what's now our program when his independent school in Mississippi went remote in early 2020. He had just received a grant from Meta and sent headsets home with his students, and noticed that the classes that had headsets versus those that were on Zoom had much higher levels of engagement and retention. And that anecdotal evidence was enough to decide to dive into that head first. And I joined him and the rest of our colleagues soon after, and we built out a curriculum and got a charter through Collier County in the state of Florida. And so we have just concluded our first year of operations as a full-time school. We have a complete curriculum that is standards aligned. We also have intentional time for socialization and make sure that our students don't miss out on those opportunities. And I'll keep moving because I know we have limited time here. But how does this help you? So what did we learn in year one about integrating VR into a traditional curriculum, even though we were all online in VR? Well, quite a bit, because no one else was doing it. So we made all the mistakes for you. I'm sure not all of them, but most of them at least, I feel like. And we also hopefully discovered the benefits that you'll be able to take away today. So a couple of the benefits that align nicely with a HyFlex approach, I believe, are that it is a flexible approach. I know Dr. Dietrich and Dr. Clubs just mentioned that they have both asynchronous and synchronous options. And so our coursework can also be consumed, we call it live or on demand. And because we deal with a younger student population, our on demand is parsed into usually 2-week chunks that come after the live learning. But unlike graduate students, they're unable to go back and forth. You're either in the live track or the on-demand track because they're at different stages. And those, we don't have time to get in the weeds, but as you may guess, those vary in amount and responsibility based upon what age level those students are. It's also very portable. Being in Florida and post-COVID, we had a large population of families who moved there because the parents went remote, or they decided that they wanted to go and pursue horseback riding or soccer or baseball or lacrosse. And we have several competitive athletes in our student body who normally in a traditional brick and mortar would miss dozens of days per year to go to tournaments, but are able to have perfect attendance with us and can bring school with them wherever they go. And the key to that is most HyFlex can go with students wherever they go. I know that, but it's inherently social. For those of you who haven't been in VR, our students don't feel as though they're missing out depending on which modality they take. They're able to shake hands, high five, get haptic feedback. We can break them into small groups. They can still be an integral part of the learning process, just as if they were at home in their living room. And you know, as I said, it's inherently social. It is immersive. All 3 pathways to memory, traditional pathways to memory, are being met in each lesson. You have visual, auditory, you have haptic or kinesthetic learning. We also developed 200 different locations that we can use as classrooms. So it's possible, in fact, that you could have a different location for each lesson you have not only that day, but each lesson that class has in a year. And so you can tie what you learned to a specific place. As an aside, there's a really interesting article that I can send along afterwards if you'd like, that has some emerging research on VR and memory palaces. And this idea that if students can tie, you know, even a virtual geography to some learning, they're able to then chase down that and recall and retain that information a little better. All right, so VR content on demand is what I would recommend for a first integration. It's a big lift to go synchronous, and it's kind of an all or nothing thing, right? It's not an easy thing to do part way, but on demand coursework is very attainable in VR, and it can be what you would call single player. You could have a single student in there in a scalable experience where you could have your whole class do it individually, or you could even do on demand at a given time and location in VR where everyone could meet together to go through it. One of the nice things is that there's 3 different steps you could have to get into on demand. You could do field trips. We have done a pilot program for a school district in California where we taught their entire 6th grade science curriculum based on field trips, which were about 80 minutes long. There were just shy of 24 field trips that met every standard for the state curriculum. And they actually performed better on their state assessment at the end of the year than most other classrooms in that county. It can be a lot safer than a traditional field trip if you have transportation issues, if you want to go see something that maybe not all parents are going to sign the permission slip for, because you're going to a part of the city or a part of the world that may not be stable. And again, it's immersive. It can also be historical. We have a field trip where our 7th graders in the state of Florida, they have to learn about the space economy. And so they hear from JFK sitting in the audience about going to the moon. And they feel as though they're there, they're seeing the reporters and the black and white footage. And they get to interact in that in some different activities. And you can also access places not available normally. We have photorealistic places for them to learn on the moon or inside a volcano, or anywhere that you could have 360 video or send a drone. You could have class that day and be able to inhabit what you're talking about. Another step in could be a complete course. I know more and more states are passing laws that there's a HyFlex, or that are HyFlex friendly. I mean, that are requiring an online course for a graduation requirement. Florida is one of them. And so you could use VR for your online course requirement to give your students even a bigger step up. As I may be biased here running a VR school, but I believe that the internet 10, 12 years from now is going to be more 3-dimensional than 2-dimensional, and preparing students of whatever age for that future is an important thing. You can also use this to address teacher shortages. It's a way to ensure that there's uniform engagement and opportunity and access to information, or for hard to staff coursework. So if you have and this could be K-12 or university level, if you have a course that it is difficult to find a qualified professor or teacher, you're able to band together with other professionals, other universities, and you could again do that either live or on demand. And then a total curriculum. So we have addressed solutions for maternity leave situations, for an abrupt teacher exit, where you can have some curriculum that steps in and students don't miss a beat, and then they're able to transition back into a live brick and mortar if they would like. All right, so as I mentioned, flexibility, schedule, and location, you can offer it to all students regardless of enrollment type. On demand gives you an even larger degree of flexibility because they can consume it whatever time they would like within a specified time frame for assignments to be open. For us, it's 2 weeks. You can address shortages, as I said. It's cost effective. It's actually a lot more affordable of an entry point than you may believe. The headset itself that we use is the Quest 2. It's only $299. It's the same amount as a Chromebook. We aren't using the $3,500 Apple headsets as much as I might like to. I just don't think that's going to be reality anytime soon. And it's safe. So any educational VR platform should be, it's not the traditional Meta corporate platform or the social metaverse. It should be a closed platform where you have double layers of security, a password and account that has to be registered in the server to enter. And then you also have to have a meeting code that we use a secondary software in the student headset so that they don't actually even have access to that code. We just send it to them and they're able to come in. But in over a year, we haven't had anyone VR bomb our sessions yet. A couple of things that you should look for. You should look to make sure that it's a good fit with your curriculum if you decide to integrate VR, not just pedagogically, but also pace-wise, because as you all I'm sure know, with a vendor in a HyFlex curriculum, if there's no limits on how fast students can go, and I'm thinking to some of our biggest competitors in Florida, there are some students who are completing a course in 2-3 weeks, and it's supposed to be a semester or even a year-long course. And I believe that we want to take a little more time to have deep learning rather than just fast learning. And then it should be able to be viewed live or on demand. And I don't mean that I'm suggesting you go on demand. I don't mean that you should have that option necessarily, but it should be such a quality of instruction that you wouldn't necessarily know the difference if you were to step in for 5 minutes, whether the lesson was being delivered live or whether it was being consumed after the fact. And you have all the resources available to do that. All right, I know I'm down to 1 or 2 minutes here, so I'm going to go. So a couple things to do. If you decide to get into this process as the practical element of it, you should identify the right partner. Your curriculum should have the 6 degrees of freedom, meaning you can look up, down, left, right, move forward and back. Some VR curricula are just stand still and look around, which is similar to 3D Google Earth. You should have a flexibility of session type. You could have a single person in there, you could have multiple people in there, or you could have a single person in there done several times at once so that you can have volume for all of your students. If they all decide to log in at 8 o'clock on Tuesday because the assignment is due Wednesday, you don't want them competing with each other and kicking people out. And you should have different mobile access options. So all of our curriculum can be viewed in the headset, on a laptop in 2 dimensions, or even on a phone. And so you can either create your own phone-based VR headset with some cardboard or some harness that they sell on Amazon, or you could just consume it in 2D on your phone if you weren't able to bring your headset for whatever reason. Finally, course and content providers should be standards aligned. As with any new technology, there are a fair number of people racing to be involved, and not all of them are virtuous. So do your homework and make sure that you aren't getting in with someone who has promised much and delivered little. If you Google VR high school, there's about 5 that claim they do it, but if you go further, not all of them actually have coursework available, but they will take your deposit. And then finally, they should be accredited from a reputable agency such as Cognia or a regional accrediting agency, because they are accrediting VR curriculum at this point. So if someone tells you they aren't, then again, that should not be viewed as a legitimate thing. All right, I think I probably went about 10 seconds over. I'm sorry, but thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was an awesome presentation.
I appreciate it. Thank
so
you.
we have 5 minutes for questions for Dan. There's a couple of questions in the chat. One of the questions was about VR headsets. They come with a warning about not exposing children to VR at all or for long periods because of brain development. Have you had to address this? And conversely, do any of your instructors or students suffer motion sickness or other issues from using VR?
It's a great question. So Meta is actually dropping the recommended age from 13 to 10. Anecdotally, most of the reason they put it at 13 and a lot of the reason they're going to 10 is it reflects the standard user agreement language in most of their third-party app developers. It doesn't have, there's no evidence physically of those ages having any issue. And in fact, Stanford has done some studies with students down to 8 years old with no negative impacts. And so we have not had anyone motion sick. We do recommend and guide our students and faculty in slowly. We jokingly say they need to get their VR legs. So you don't go out and do a 45-minute, excursion in a wingsuit flight or something like that on your first time. You want to do something basic and get used to it. But usually for kids, about 2 or 3 hours, a cumulative time, and they're ready to go. And adults, it may be 4 or 5, but it's not a huge steep learning curve. But yeah,
Right, so-
thank you for that question.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions about motion sickness. Again, go ahead and feel free to respond to them in the chat. Do you give students a choice of using VR or completing an alternative assignment or activity, or to opt out due to motion sickness or other reason?
At this point, that hasn't presented itself. We do have alternative ways to engage the material. And so every lesson is recorded, so you could go back and watch in 2 dimensions from the perspective of the teacher, or depending upon the lesson, we sometimes have a cameraman, an extra person in VR. Someone might log in on their headset and then in a cameraman account from their computer and record the lesson, as though they were in the back of the classroom. And so we can provide accommodation that way.
Thank you. There's also a question about Sony. Do you know whether Sony plans to venture into VR for education? Their platforms seem ready as technology, but not for privacy concerns.
Yeah, it's a good question. I have not heard about Sony coming out anytime soon. I know Lenovo is releasing one this year, I believe, hopefully by the end of the year, which will help to drive the cost of high level 6 degree of freedom headsets down and keep it down. It may actually bring the Quest Pro down a little bit, which will make it more accessible for helping drive, further, probably more into the higher ed spaces with just the cost structure, to be honest, and an ability for students to create in there.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both presenters. Let's give a hand to both presenters for their incredible presentations. So we have about 3 or 4 minutes left for any questions for either presenter. So if anyone would like to unmute and ask a question, go for it. Yeah, so I think we did the answer to David's question, but if not, Jennifer, do unmute if I didn't respond or
Yeah,
ask.
sorry, I'm interested in the alternatives for accessibility with VR. I know this is something the gaming world is also working on, and I work in digital and electronic literature, and it's become a hot topic when it comes to VR. So I know one of David's questions was, are there alternative ways for students in Dan's Academy to work with the content it looks like to accommodate them if they need it?
Yeah, and so if you didn't want to watch the VR lesson in 2D after the fact, there are alternative ways. All of our assessment is done in Canvas and uploaded through there. We use that as our LMS, and so all of the material is available, and we have a digital textbook that's proprietary for each course that we've created that goes along with that. We also each day have 2 hours of tutoring time available where our faculty are live in Teams, Microsoft Teams, to jump in with students and help walk through anything that's missed. So if you were to get in and discover that VR wasn't for you, we wouldn't leave you on an island. There would be a way for you to stay up to date and still be in relationship with your instructor and getting what you need.
Thank you so much. And any other questions? I think we have room for one more question. There's a question about, do you use a blend of other communication tools, David?
Yes, we do use a blend of other communication tools too. Yes, so we, like many K-12 schools, we also use Remind. We, as a charter school, have to use a third-party lottery vendor that's called Schoolmint, and they have a function where we can communicate with families and with students. We use Canvas for messages. Ironically, we don't have student email accounts that we use. We find that actually they respond better when it's done through Canvas, because parents can be copied on that communication. And in a K-12 environment, we prefer to keep parents and then also me in the loop on any communication back and forth between faculty and students.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Just a reminder that Quickly has sponsored this session, so we're so thankful to them as well. Please feel free to reach out to presenters with questions or anything that didn't get unanswered within the Whova app or within their contact information that they've provided. Thank you for these incredible presentations. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day. I love that presenters are providing their email and their contact information. And again, please feel free to go to the Whova app too if you would like to communicate. So thank you, everybody. Have the best day. I'll see you at concurrent sessions.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Hi, thank you for your amazing presentations.
Thanks.